A man was sentenced to die by hanging in Exeter, England, after being found guilty of stabbing a young woman to death. After 3 failed attempts, by law, the condemned was allowed to remain among the living. The astonishing story of the man who could not be hanged eventually reached the halls of the New York State Legislature, where they were searching for a more dependable, efficient, and humane way to execute its criminals. New York Governor David Hill established a commission to assess a new method of execution. They reported that the most potent agent known for the destruction of human life is electricity, which paralyzed the brain so quickly nerves in the body could not convey a sense of shock or pain. In June 1888, death by electricity was made the official method of execution in New York. Death chambers were built at the prisons in Dannemora, Auburn, and Sing Sing. The new technology would make its debut at Auburn Prison on August 6, 1890, when William Kemmler, who had been found guilty of killing his lover with a hatchet, was put to death. Kemmler would challenge that the chair was cruel and unusual punishment. When the power was shut off, doctors discovered that he was still breathing. They shouted for the current to be turned back on, which they did. Later, inventor George Westinghouse would remark, "They would have done better with an axe." Kemmler's botched execution would not be the last at Auburn. A malfunction during the execution of William Taylor on July 27, 1893, broke apart the chair and burned out the generator. Taylor, after enduring a 1,260-volt blast of electricity, was carried alive to an autopsy table and given a dose of ether to keep him alive, to be electrocuted again. Power cables were thrown over the prison's walls and attached to the local power grid to finally put Taylor to death. Even so, the electric chair was adopted by Ohio in 1897, Massachusetts in 1900, New Jersey 1906, and Virginia in 1908. It would go on to become the preferred method of execution in the United States in the 20th century. By 1915, the state's executions were consolidated at Sing Sing, about 30 miles north of New York City on the east bank of the Hudson River. The prison's electric chair, given the nickname Old Sparky, was first put into action on July 7, 1891, and over the next 70-some years would witness the deaths of 614 people. Sing Sing's electric chair would average nearly 8 deaths a year, but during its peak in the first quarter of the 20th century, there could be as many as 7 executions a day. Old Sparky was situated in a purpose-built building known as the Death House, a sort of prison inside the larger prison. There were 24 cells for the condemned men, and an additional 3 for condemned women. The chamber where a prisoner would spend their last day was known as the dance hall, and the corridor which led to the death chamber was the last mile. Victims of the chair were called thunderbolt jockeys. Executions at Sing Sing were traditionally carried out on Thursday nights after 11 p.m. Prisoners were brought to the execution chamber by 7 guards and accompanied by the prison chaplain. Inside the chamber waiting would be the warden, the state electrician, 2 doctors, and 12 state witnesses. Leather straps would bind the prisoner to the brown wooden chair. An electrode, placed above a sponge damp with brine, is strapped on the prisoner's leg by the electrician. Then, a leather helmet containing another electrode and sponge is placed on the condemned's cleanly shaven head. He connects a cable, then wraps a black leather mask around the prisoner's face and pulls it tight, buckling it around the back of the chair. The emotional toll on the people who made these executions possible was high. They were unpleasant, stressful, administrative nightmares, and public relations hassles. Sing Sing Dr. Amos Squire witnessed the horror of the prison's Black Thursday on August 12, 1912, when 7 men were put to death, each one going crazy in their cells as the next was taken away. Squire would never forget it. All of us in the execution chamber, witnesses and officials, could hear them, as could those of the 7 who went first. The shrieking and wailing I heard that day is indescribable. The whole was like a nightmare, unreal and yet horrible. State electrician John Hurlburt, who took the job at Sing Sing to earn extra money to pay for his wife's medical bills, finally had enough and resigned in 1926 after executing 140 prisoners. In 1929, he shot himself in his basement. On August 15, 1963, Eddie Lee Mays, a convicted murderer who had told reporters that he would rather fry than face a life in prison, was the 695th and last person executed in the electric chair in New York State. 2 years later, the state abolished capital punishment. When it reinstated the practice in 1995, lethal injection was the preferred method of ending a person's life. Like the electric chair in the late 19th century, lethal injection was a more humane, cleaner, less painful form of death. The death penalty was stopped again in 2004 after the Court of Appeals ruled that capital punishment violated the state constitution. No inmates were executed during this time. After a series of botched executions, more states began to reconsider the electric chair. Today, just 9 states retain the chair as a legally allowable method of execution, though nowhere is it the state's preferred choice.